So today I'm joined by Heather Adkins, who's the Managing Director, Marketing Growth and Strategy at KPMG US. Heather, thanks so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Deck.
Well, look, we've been chasing each other back and forth and trying to organize this. I'm delighted that you could come on the show to talk about ABM, to talk about KPMG, and talk a little bit about, which I think we'll touch on as well, the future of ABM. And we'll probably even mention the letters A and I, artificial intelligence, I'm sure, as well on this episode. So let's kick off with a question about KPMG. And there was a number that you gave me when we were chatting prior to the recording that kind of, I wrote it down. And I thought, wow. My understanding is you run a team there of 160 marketers, of which 50 approx are ABMers. So an ABM team of 50, which is probably one of the biggest ABM teams globally. Be interesting to see your thoughts on that. Could you give us a little bit of background about how ABM plays a key role in the growth strategy of KPMG, and a little bit about how ABM is structured across the organization?
Yeah, most certainly. And I would take it higher, a level higher than that. At KPMG, we all focus on accounts across every part of the firm. All functions, all go-to-market teams, sales, marketing, you name it. It's embedded everywhere, and it's definitely a major part of our growth strategy. We know that in order to grow and still share a wallet from competitors, which is what we all want to do, right? We have to swarm our accounts with experiences that are relevant to them. Being in professional services, we don't make products, but rather we sell our people's ideas. And so, brand relevancy at the sector level and then also at the account level is very critical to our success. Elevating our people as thought leaders in their space and being able to activate the insights that they provide at the account level is also a very important part of our strategy. So in marketing, we're really just following suit with the business in the way that we focus on accounts, right? It's deeply integrated and it's where we make a lot of investment. So, mentioning the org of 160 marketers strong. So yes, over 50 of those marketers solely focus on ABM across our 4 account tiers. And they're aligned across, the typical kind of one-to-one, one-to-few, one-to-many ABM approach. Our sales organization is also structured that way. And we definitely approach the way that we cover accounts in a unified front. As with any successful ABM program, right? Collaboration with sales is critical. So we really have this intense focus and are working towards common goals with synchronized efforts, regular meetings, joint planning sessions, the way we look at success together and measure success together. And most importantly, across, sales and marketing, we have joint insights and we're continuously kind of exchanging insights. So we have this common understanding of the client and how we should best serve the client. I think another thing worth mentioning is that we do go to market by sector. So when I joined the firm, I fully integrated the industry marketing and account-based marketing teams, and they're all aligned by sector. And what this does for us is that you have, a sector marketer who looks at the macro trends, the emerging themes. They work directly with sector subject matter experts and really help to develop our points of view and thought leadership. They also run marquee sector marketing programs, sponsorships, events. And then you have the account-based marketers who are covering accounts that are in that sector who work very closely with them, right? So the account-based marketers are closest to the client. They understand what's actually resonating or not resonating with the client, and then they can help inform content that's being developed. So having those two teams super close together in the same reporting line has really been a game changer for us because they're able to come together kind of early enough, often enough, through sector communities, a collaboration framework we stood up to come together to co-create strategy. So whatever we're developing from, a global perspective, national perspective, we want it to resonate with our top accounts. There still needs to be personalization, but if we're pulling in a lot of those client insights, sector insights from the account-based marketers that are closest to the client, we should be able to get it, at least 80% of the way there. So that's really how our team is structured and how we approach account-based marketing.
Wow, there's an awful lot to unpack there. That was quite a Massachusetts Institute of Technology how to do ABM at a large corporate. I just wanted to, I made a few notes, so I just wanted to play them back to you and to the audience, really. I think there's some amazing things. I think, did you say to actually swarm the account?
Yes.
No, so I love that expression there, was swarm the account. And I also love the thing you said there about you sell people's ideas.
Yep.
And, I think you were saying about, it's so important for your thought leaders and for the individuals within the consultancy such as KPMG to be sector experts and industry experts and account experts, which is a really interesting thing you were saying, because I'm guessing we might move on to that shortly. But some of your customers are very, very large companies. Clearly, many of them are very large, and equally, their value to you is significant. So these are large accounts where they're investing significantly with yourselves and working in partnerships. So that sector, industry, and people expertise, company expertise is huge. And I love this thing you said, which I love whenever anyone mentions that. I love is closest. Your account-based marketers are closest to the clients, and I think that's a sign of success of a great ABM app, is when they're very aligned with the salespeople and very close, and they're on the calls. They're on the calls with the customer and with the account teams, right? And I think another thing I wrote down here was common understanding, that you've got a common understanding of the client. So sales and account-based marketing teams understand the issues facing the customer. So there's no kind of disconnect there. So I think there was so many great things that you mentioned there, Heather. So I think we'll have to split these out, and when we do some promotion of this episode, we'll pull out a lot of these quotes to share with the audience. A question actually linked to what you were just saying. And I think I'm right in saying that a large focus of what you do is obviously working with, KPMG's got an awful, a large majority of Fortune 500 work with yourselves and have done for many, many years. And I think that a large focus of the ABM program there is client expansion as opposed to net new. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
So if the focus is client expansion, that in some ways is a lot easier, but in other ways it requires a different focus, right? Because obviously you've done net new before. So for the audience, perhaps could you maybe point out a couple of things that you see different about client expansion using ABM as opposed to the kind of the net new? That if you think about ABM has kind of got very kind of more, not fashionable is probably not the right word, but more expanded in its usage over the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years. A large part of that has been around net new logo, whereas also the origins of ABM are with customer expansion. So perhaps if you could touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. So client expansion is really where we place our big bets, and our marketing organization is designed to deliver on that vision. It really is about client expansion versus net new logo acquisition. And because they're already clients, I think it makes our ABM strategy a lot more robust, because if you think about it, with current clients, there's this treasure trove of data and insights available. So this really positions us or allows us for a higher level of personalization, customization based on the unique needs of the client and the cues we get from the client. So, and to our earlier point, right, it's like we want to be students of the firm. So we have to know what our capabilities are and how to be the connective tissue across the firm. But we also want to be students of the client and really understand and intimately know, right, what the client is about and how they need to grow their organization. So our efforts are concentrated on expanding relationships within these organizations. Relationships are really big. We spend a lot of time identifying key decision makers, who are the economic buyers. We do a lot of relationship mapping, and then we build marketing plans to deepen those relationships. I think another really, kind of cool point with client expansion is that we can leverage advocacy and case studies. These clients oftentimes serve as influential voices within their sector. So when we get that right, it really goes a long way to perhaps get our foot in the door somewhere.
Yeah. I love that. And I think you just said something there, connective tissue across our firm, which I think is absolutely a wonderful way to almost like an organism. There's a lot of obviously business speak that a company acts as an organism in many, many ways. And the fact that the ABM team are the connective tissue is a really interesting way and a very visual way of explaining it. Yeah. And I think I love the fact that you talk about relationships. And I think to advance a point on that, does that mean that from how you look at the success of ABM is the number of relationships and depth of the relationships one of the key kind of metrics that you look to track?
100%. We definitely look at that, how we deepen relationships and how we create environments in marketing where a relationship can deepen.
And I'm guessing, with these firms that you're working with and the kind of the partners at KPMG and the senior managers and everything, I had some previous experience working in that kind of field. Those are people that tend to stay with you for a long time, and equally their counterparts tend to be a long time in those companies, right? So that investment keeps paying back, right?
Yep, absolutely. And that's why it's important too to elevate them as thought leaders in their space. So in marketing, we play a very critical role in helping them do that as well.
Well, we might just touch on that for a second, actually, Heather. When you say elevate them, the people within your business to be thought leaders, can you share a couple of anecdotes on where you do that successfully? And
yeah, absolutely. So we have what we call an influencer program where we literally take over, right, our partners' social accounts and really help them come up with tactics and strategies to elevate their personal brand out in the marketplace. And so, them being on the forefront and marketing being on the forefront of when a salesperson sits down with a client, we already have that brand permission and that credibility within that space. And so elevating our executives, our partners as thought leaders in that space, and marketing having, a critical role in making that happen.
And I've done a lot of these kind of social selling programs and, as you said, brand and peer branding programs. What's their initial impression when you sit down with them and say, "Hey, John or Jill, hey, I'm looking to do this, and would you be happy to come on board?" What is it? Is it generally a very, very positive response?
I would say 99% of them welcome the help. They're busy, sitting down with clients. They're busy being out in the marketplace, and so if this is something that we can help them with, they're usually very excited to have the help.
Yeah, well, so that's great to hear, and I think the audience. Not that many companies are doing this very, very well. So it's great. I think it's important for the audience to hear that, to know, well, actually, you can launch a successful program of this type and with the results that you mentioned. Just one thing, Heather, you said there earlier, you said that you had 4 distinct account tiers that you mentioned. So that obviously means that you've got somewhat of a nuanced approach to ABM. Without giving away the kind of the crown jewels, can you share perhaps a little bit about how you think about these 4 tiers and how they're structured and what it means to you in terms of, going back to your point around prioritization, perhaps a little bit on that?
Yeah, definitely. So our ABM strategy does consist of the traditional, one-to-one, one-to-few, one-to-many, all named accounts that are mostly already clients, like we discussed. But where the nuance comes into play and why we have 4 distinct account tiers is that there's such a wide range in that one to few tier. Company size of the account for us in terms of revenue generated, what we think, future or potential growth could be. Some are easier to cluster than others based on like attributes such as industry or business outcomes. And so in order for us to successfully apply entitlements or ABM treatments, there's enough differentiation within that middle tier that we have 4 distinct tiers now. And we invest in each tier differently. So at the top of the pyramid, we have dedicated marketers, super rich insights, very bespoke, more personalized, more VIP client experiences. The marketers are embedded in the account team. They really act as, strategic advisors to the account team. I tell them, almost daily that they can serve as the CMO on that account, right? So a CMO would know their industry, they would know their market. In this case, it's the accounts they cover. They understand where the opportunities are, the white space, where the client is showing intent, and then they can build that strategic account-based marketing plan to help the account team drive growth. So they're really sitting shoulder to shoulder with the entire account team coming up with that growth plan. And then at the bottom of the pyramid, it's more account portfolio based, and that's where the topic of scalability comes into play. I know that's a hot topic with ABMers, right? So being able to scale our efforts while still delivering that highly relevant content and interactions that will resonate with the client.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think you're right to say that scalability is one of the hot hot topics, buzzwords at the moment for many ABMers is how do they actually take what they've done and scale. So I think we might touch on it in a second. I love that thing, and very often when I explain to people what ABM is, to try to kind of, make it a lot more easier to understand, I always say that the origins of ABM were basically putting a CMO into a very large account. So dropping one of your team into, I suppose if you think about the origins, when I was doing key account management, all that kind of stuff with Kotler and all those kind of people, you would put a key account manager into an account or a key account team into account, and everybody thought that was completely logical, but nobody thought about doing the same with marketing. And that's somewhat the origins of ABM. So it's interesting how you've mentioned that as well, that you see them in your top tier accounts as being the CMO. I think that's a great way of putting it, really. I think one thing that we touched on before when we were talking prior to recording was, I think you said in order to kind of get the scale that you do and have achieved, and obviously the number of marketers and the number of accounts that you're touching, etc., that you lean very heavily on a couple of things. I think you said to me you lean very heavily on shared services, and somewhat the term was offshoring, but I don't think it's necessarily offshoring in the way that most people understand offshoring. So is there anything you can share about how you've managed to achieve that scale with the organization you've got, whether they're direct reports into you or whether you're leaning on other parts of the business?
Yeah, I'll answer that kind of in two ways. I mean, the obvious answer is we leverage technology and automation. We execute broader campaigns targeted, to a larger group of accounts with common attributes. And that's how we deliver personalized experiences at scale. But to go a little bit deeper, and I would say a little perhaps less obvious, all accounts in our top 3 tiers have account plans. So an account plan for us is simply just that blueprint to knowing where the client is today, where the client wants to be, and how we're going to help them get there. So some of the things that we look at, right, is how industry trends are impacting them, what history do we have with them, what services have we delivered, have there been any delivery issues we need to be aware of, what challenges are they facing today, what are their current business goals. And then with technology, we can synthesize across a large number of accounts those account plans and look for common themes that bubble up. When common themes bubble up, that really helps us drive scalability, right? Because we can better cluster accounts. We know what content should resonate. It helps us to better target and build audiences for campaigns. So in that one-to-many tier, we use technology to synthesize account plans. But going back up to that one-to-one tier, those marketers are acting as the CMO of that account, right? So they are actually involved in account planning. They have a seat at the table. They're developing that blueprint for the client. They're helping develop that blueprint for the client. So account plans become very critical for us in every tier, whether they're being used at the top to create bespoke experiences or whether we're using technology in the one-to-many fashion, right, to synthesize the data and scale our efforts across a broader set of accounts. And then in terms of your, kind of question around shared service or offshoring, when I joined the firm almost 4 years ago, we didn't have a one-to-many approach at all. It's like we were missing that entire bottom layer of the equation. So the question of scaling became a very important one for me to figure out. So my objective was to follow suit with the firm and focus the bulk of the resources on those top 2 tiers, but also have the remit to figure out how we support a broader set of key accounts, all while really honing in the role of the account-based marketer and what value we can bring. So, first thing was just a lot of education across the firm, right? Conversations that we had to drive first to gain a common level of understanding that I talked about. What value do we bring across all account tiers? So as I mentioned, we definitely leverage technology and automation, but a big piece that was still missing with not having a dedicated marketer for the accounts in the bottom tiers was being able to deliver account level insights, account level research to the account team, or to the relationship manager that's covering that account, right? And then not only delivering the insights, but also as marketers, being able to recommend what should that next step be? What are those actions that they should take as a result of what we're seeing in the data? So that's where, shared services and building an offshore muscle really came into play. And we recently stood up a program called Insights to Action Packs. So we now have an offshore engine. It's a well-oiled machine. They're really good at what they do. They leverage AI and they keep delivering really amazing work at scale They crank out research, reporting. There's also an enablement play. We've tasked them with developing account-based collateral, client-facing materials. And so it just has become, again, a really great way that we have created a more sustainable model for those tasks that are more tactical or transactional in nature, and that we can support a broader set of accounts in doing so.
Yeah, I love that header. I've just written down here, insight to action packs. So in effect, you're obviously, as you said, leveraging technology, leveraging AI. The team are having access to those conversations, that data, as you said, and they're using that to decide what kind of insights would help that customer make, some of the right decisions that you talked about earlier, and understand a little bit about the portfolio of how you help them. And I think the other thing I loved was, which I think is a little bit linked to kind of the approach of an account-based marketing value proposition, which I think you said we have a blueprint, which is where is the customer today, where does the customer want to be, and how can we help them to get there? And that for me is very often when you create a great, personalized value proposition, which you talk to one customer, that's somewhat how you can translate those 3 bullet points you just mentioned into that kind of compelling VP, right?
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
So let's just talk one point. We mentioned about partners, and obviously my experience of working with the likes of KPMG and that kind of area of the world, and the people in your sphere, is obviously the partner plays a really, really, really important role, right? Mm-hmm. And very often many partners are also carrying out a lot of the sales, right? They're kind of leading the sales activities or being the kind of major point of contact in terms of a lot of these very large commercial deals that you're working on. I suppose my question was, which obviously one thing is to align with sales, one thing is to align marketing, and to get that alignment together, which, as we know, can be a challenge for many, many companies. But you've got to bring in the partners as well. And obviously these are, certain type of personalities, certain type of people, very kind of, they've been hired to do a very important job. Is there anything that you've learned from that experience of aligning that triumvirate of sales, marketing, and partners?
Yeah, so we definitely have a culture that everyone sells at KPMG. We do have a centralized sales organization, but to your point around the partnership, everyone sells, right? And I think to really gain that cross-firm alignment across functions, sectors, markets, it really has become very important for us to have a centralized and firm-wide agreed upon account list, first of all, right? And that account list defines the 4 tiers that we talked about. And we are also working towards having clearer criteria for how accounts move up or down in tiers. And the third point is that we have now defined how we should cover accounts in each tier, and not just from a marketing perspective, but also for sales, for account management, for all of the other support roles that are account-based. And when we have done this and all aligned, the partnership, the sales organization, the entire go-to-market team, it really becomes the foundation for everything else that we do, where we invest, where we put resources, where we spend campaign dollars. So I kind of think about it much like the account plan is the blueprint for the client. The account list, the criteria, the account coverage model becomes the blueprint for us internally and how we gain alignment and stay aligned throughout the fiscal year. And also worth noting that this is not a one and done proposition, but we have to revisit this annually, through our firm-wide planning and calibration process, where all functions, all markets, all industries are involved.
Yeah, it seems you've covered off a lot of the bases there. I just wrote down a couple of things here, which is obviously with regards to the kind of the clear, agreed methodology for when an account moves up a tier or moves down a tier. And we very often in our agency, we talk an awful lot about promoting and demoting based on behavior, engagement, or other measurements that you can see. So it's interesting to see that you're also following that as well. And also you said about, when do accounts come into the tiers in the first place, right? When the account selection, which a lot of people get, a lot of people get it wrong. And clearly, the way that you guys are thinking about it in a joined up fashion across the whole firm is quite novel, really. I haven't come across that often. Just one point to touch on there, when you talked about campaign dollars, right? So obviously, my experience working with partnerships is obviously money is looked at even closer than a regular, listed company, so to speak, with a partnership looks at the dollar even closer. How does it work in terms of how you report back on terms of the ROI of what you're doing there? Because I'm guessing it becomes even more critical for you in a partnership. Just briefly, we touched on relationships earlier, but how do you report back? Are you using the 3Rs methodology? Have you invented your own? Do you have a hybrid?
Yeah, and definitely wish I had the silver bullet answer on this one and a magic dashboard with the perfect metrics to share. But what I will say is that with a huge focus on accounts and a huge focus on large accounts for that matter, the fact that we're selling our people's ideas versus, a widget, it is about the relationships, right? So yes, a lot of our success is measured by how we're deepening relationships, environments that we create where a door can be opened or a new connection can be made. And bonus points if that relationship is with someone that's relevant to an opportunity that we see with the client or that the client is showing intent for. So a good example of this is, if we've identified cyber as an opportunity for a client, in marketing, we'll focus on the CISO, right? That's the buyer we want to get in front of, so getting the right messages in front of them and maybe targeting them for those VIP experiences or other client events. And so showing ROI, an early indicator of success and where that campaign dollar went, right, might be that a door was opened to the CISO. So an introduction was made, and then we can track what happens from there. We can track meetings that occur, opportunities that are created, pipeline that's generated. Of course, we have the traditional kind of funnel metrics at the individual or lead level. Also at the account level, we look at funnel metrics. We have an attribution model. All of that good stuff that we look at and use to optimize, but for us is really about the relationships and what happens next. We also have, because it is about relationships, we have something that we call relationship whitespace. So, and we track metrics on this to see what's happening. But we have a platform that gives us insight into how strong or not strong our relationship is with a particular client or account. And so when we see that an account has a very low relationship score, but yet that account is highly engaged, right? They're attending webcast events, they're opening emails, they're reading our thought leadership. That's a person we need to get in front of. And in marketing, we surface those opportunities to the account team as someone, that you should get in front of.
Is that bespoke software that you have developed, or is it kind of off the shelf that somebody could hopefully find?
It's a vendor.
It's a vendor. Yeah. Well, so therefore, if people want to know, they should send you a direct message on LinkedIn, and you.
It's a vendor called Introhive.
Excellent. Well, the people, I'm sure some of the audience might make some feverish notes about that. And I love the fact that I just love this thing you said. You said it's about the environments we create. So what you're saying in effect is that you're creating, as you said, the right atmosphere, the right environment, the right circumstances. And if you can do that, then the team at KPMG will follow up the account team, the account managers, the directors, partners. If those environments are made, what you're saying in effect is that a lot of the work, not all the work clearly, but with the brand that you have and the service offering that you have, clearly the partners can lead on that and the account teams and they can convert those opportunities or move, as you said, move them through the pipe a lot quicker than perhaps otherwise, right?
Yeah, and it is two-pronged. We do a lot of digital marketing, right? I mean, marketing serves as being out in front of our selling teams with digital messages to create those, brand permissions and credibility. But then it's about the relationships and the doors that we help open for our partners and professionals that are serving clients.
I love that. We mentioned at the top of the show AI. So let's just have a little chat about that now. I know that it's obviously something that KPMG offers in terms of its services, in terms of all the various ways that you work with customers, in terms of your advisory services, transforming customers' approach to AI. What's out of curiosity for the audience and account-based marketers listening to this podcast, what are you using perhaps internally in terms of how you personalize your ABM approach or your insights or how you automate? Can you share a couple of things that you're doing?
Yeah, so our AI solutions have definitely become a significant component, like you said, of what we offer to our clients. And it's really embedded in not just advisory, but tax and audit as well. We consider ourselves client zero. meaning that we need to fast track our own AI adoption, trying as many use cases as possible, as quickly as possible, to then be able to share those rich insights and learnings with our clients and help them develop and transform their approaches to AI. So you can imagine what that means for us, right? In marketing, we have executed several like rapid experimentation phases where we think about the art of the possible, we gather all of the use cases, and then test many different technologies, and we look for viability. And that's just, the process that we take, right? And then we ask ourselves the obvious questions like, does this save time? Does this eliminate or speed up parts of our workflow? But then we also ask, is this viable from a brand quality perspective, from a creative quality perspective? And then for ABM, will this help us scale to a broader set of accounts? The insights to action packs that I mentioned earlier is powered by is powered by AI. We also ask, will this enhance the way we personalize? Will this help us with account scoring and prioritization? And so and we've stood up different technologies and platforms to help us do all of that through new AI technologies. So for us, it really is just embedded in every way that we work, our ways of working, and in just about every workflow that we have in marketing.
Yeah, I love that. And I think the fact that you mentioned so many use cases of where you're seeing it, but equally from an ethical and from a brand point of view, is what you're producing matching your brand values? Is it ethical, etc.? So I think that's a really important message for the market. And as you mentioned the use case earlier, from the offshoring point of view of the insights pack, I think that's a great example of how you see it working in reality. You talked about personalization there at scale. Do you have a story or an anecdote that you can share of how you have kind of delivered that kind of personalization at scale?
Yeah, so we talk a lot about shared values with our clients. It's very important to us. And when we focus on shared values, it really interjects this kind of human element that always gets a positive reception or reaction from our clients. So when we talk about scaling, we want to make sure we're not losing that personal touch, right? So one example that I like to give, I mean, there's a lot of them, but is a program we rolled out a few years ago, and we personalize and execute at scale. Is our Plant a Tree program. So we partner with the Arbor Day Foundation to plant trees on behalf of our clients. We send them a personalized note, personalized landing page, all with messaging around our values and how our values match those of the client and the way that we care about our communities and can come together to care about our communities. And since the inception of this program, we've planted over 60,000 trees. We've received several personal thank you notes directly from CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. And this definitely goes back to the point about relationship building, right? We're not talking about KPMG. We're not talking about what we do, what capabilities we have. We're simply creating an experience where a relationship can be deepened. And it's been very successful for us.
No, I love that. And the fact is, you're not sending them more swag or more pencil cases they don't need, or I don't know. I mean, I don't know about you, but when I left my last company, I had so many boxes of swag that I had to kind of give away or throw away. I think the fact that you're doing something which people can say, actually, do you know what? That's a really important thing. And do you know what? I love the fact that they're actually doing something on my behalf and on behalf of my children, my grandchildren, etc. I love that approach. Yeah. Let's just touch on a couple of things. One question more about KPMG before I give you a few quick fire questions. The last question I'm going to ask you about KPMG is, what do you see, like we're in February 20, we're recording this in the end of February 2025. So we're at the beginning of the year somewhat. Although everything goes very quickly, I find. What do you see as being probably the next big opportunity or challenge for ABM at KPMG? What are you thinking for this year, or what are you, particularly as you mentioned with AI and technology, the advances that are taking place every single day? What would you say is your focus or for this year?
Yeah, I think that's just it, right? I talked about the rapid experimentation and the pace of which we have to do that because we're doing that for our clients. So the biggest challenge is just keeping up with the pace of change internally and externally, and making sure that we're all focused on upskilling, up-leveling our knowledge of ABM and how that continues to evolve with technology. it's the technology that will make ABM more powerful, but there is a learning curve there and a whole lot of change management that has to happen with technology. So I think that sometimes we have to keep in mind that you have to slow down a bit in order to, really speed up exponentially.
But would you say, because I was talking to, I did this post the other day that got a lot of interest on LinkedIn when I was talking about the human side of ABM is what's going to save ABM somewhat. And that I think particularly you're talking about the kind of very senior people that you're talking to with your customers, etc. That there may be AI fatigue. You talk about creative and content, etc. Do you think that, are you of that kind of side of the argument where the human side is going to be the differentiator, or are you of the side of the argument where you think technology will be the differentiator?
Hands down, human touch, right, to that. I think that's the only way that we, this whole podcast, a lot of it has been focused on relationship building, right? So there has to be that human element, and certainly we're interjecting AI and technology into every single workflow and the ways that we work. But there has to be that human element to make it resonate, to make it personable for our clients. And so, yes, totally am in the camp of, it has to be human enabled and human powered.
Good. I'm delighted to hear that, Heather. I didn't want to fall out with you after this plug. Sure. So just to finish off the show, I always ask guests 4 very quick questions. Okay, so quick questions, quick answers. What's been your greatest ABM learning?
Prioritization. We can't be everything to everyone, but if we follow the company North Star and prioritize, we see success.
Love that. And I also mentioned the North Star as well. I love that. What do you think the hardest part of ABM is?
That internal orchestration I talked about. I shared some of my best practices today, but we're not perfect. I certainly learned from other people's best practice. But I think, if you're not internally aligned and don't have that internal orchestration, then you have a problem. So Sometimes that can be the hardest part of ABM.
Yeah, I think that's a common point many people mention. Misconception. What do you think is the greatest misconception about ABM?
My answer would have been a little different in a previous role, but I think the greatest misconception used to be at KPMG is that that ABM can only be one-to-one or maybe one-to-few, and there's no way to approach it at scale for the entire portfolio of accounts. So I mentioned some of that before, but we are myth busting that as we speak. But definitely that's what I found to be a common misconception when I joined the firm.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier the fact that you've done an awful lot of education in the company,
yes.
And those kind of education roadshows going around the company. It's so important to get that message across the company. And there's that whole, point that you had to tell somebody something 7 times or however many times it is for them to remember, right? So I think that's important. Very, very last question. We're recording this on a Tuesday afternoon, evening for me, a Tuesday morning for you. But let's fast forward to Friday. It's been a tough week there for you, Heather, and you're delighted to shut down that laptop and take the dog for a walk or have a glass of wine or a Coke or Dr. Pepper or whatever your fancy is. And the phone rings and an old colleague of yours from your previous life says, "Hey, Heather, I've got to deliver an ABM strategy on Monday morning to my CEO." And they ask you, what is the one thing I must remember to say on that, or in that rather, presentation? What would be that one thing you tell them to include?
It's all about the client, right? And I would say when they're developing the strategy, start somewhere. You don't have to have it all figured out. In fact, sometimes it's easier to actually recommend something or stand something up if you have nothing, because then you can get those quick wins and clearly demonstrate the value you bring. So start with the client and start somewhere.
Well, I think that's very good advice to finish off on. Start with the client and start somewhere. Excellent advice to finish off with, Heather. Heather, thank you so much for sharing your ABM journey with us today. And I wish you and the whole team there, your very, very large team at KPMG, every success for the future.
Thank you, Dak. Really appreciate being a guest today. Thank you.
Thank you.